Now, moving on to our second kind of sharing session, we also have an incredible community builder and an incredible protocol contributor, Jordan from Synthetix. So great to see you again, Jordan.
Hey everyone, good to be here. So yeah, I guess I'll just jump in and sort of talk about the Synthetix journey, some of the things that that we've done, and sort of the progression that we've been on. So we began fairly decentralized, as a lot of projects do. We were quite open about that as well. Like we were quite open about that fact, and I guess being open made it a little bit easier for the community to swallow. We talked to them very early on about the trade-offs between being more decentralized and being able to move at speed. And I think one of the things that Synthetix did quite well, I guess, was move at speed. That was something that we were fairly known for, the way that we shipped. So that was kind of the place that we started. We began with a foundation, as a lot of projects did in 2017, 2018. Kane always talks about the fact that we started with their foundation because everyone else started with the foundation. So using and taking the heuristics of what was just acceptable at the time. How do you structure yourself in a way where you garner the ability to for example raise money. If you're just going to try to raise money through a DAO in 2018, maybe it's not so easy. So there are some practical I guess things to how decentralization within itself is practical, and that a lot of that is dependent on the market, the timing, and obviously what's happening around you. So all of that is to say that we were fairly decentralized to begin with. Over the past 2 years, we've progressively become more decentralized. We sort of started with expanding the PDAO members. So the PDAO is short for the protocol DAO. The protocol DAO is essentially responsible for managing the code and the upgrades to the system. And I think maybe it's a good time to segue into sort of the model that we have relative to some others. So I think the terminology that you're using is the sub-DAO model. So we are using the sub-DAO model in that we have multiple DAOs that contribute to the overall direction of the protocol and contribute in various ways. So the protocol DAO is essentially engineers who qualify through a certain process, which has now been formalized. I won't expand on that process here, but all of these processes and I guess set of prerequisites that are necessary to be in the protocol DAO are actually publicly talked about in a SIP that we recently published. So we have a bunch of core contributors who are engineers, and based on those criteria, they essentially become members of the protocol DAO. And the protocol DAO, like I said, is the DAO that essentially manages the code and the upgrade process of the system. So that DAO used to be probably the most critical in terms of the functioning of the protocol. Since then, we've also added the grants DAO, which is responsible for funding public goods, and that DAO is actually voted on quarterly. So we have quarterly epochs where we have 5 members who petition. So in this way, we kind of have a version of representative democracy where anyone in the community can come and petition to be on the grants DAO. The grants DAO then basically has a quarterly budget, and that budget is their responsibility to use and to point in the right direction for funding of public goods, regardless of what those may be. So once those members have been voted in, they definitely have a level of autonomy to make decisions for the quarter, and essentially their decision making is used as a way for either advocating for themselves again in the next epoch, or if they've made bad decisions, then obviously token holders sort of look at those decisions as a way of kind of deciding. So kind of stepping back, the actual voting process itself is it's direct token voting, but we use a quadratic voting model where we're trying to, I guess, dilute quote unquote whales. So we want to make sure that we don't have voter apathy, and that we don't fall into a situation where users or token holders feel that they can't make a difference, that their vote doesn't matter. We actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, because there is a trade-off between making it fair for smaller participants, but also acknowledging that people that have a larger economic interest, which is the mostly the way that you would be a larger token holder, that they actually also have a commensurate sort of level of influence and decision making relative to the investment that they've made. So we thought about that, and we've kind of landed on something in the middle. I guess one of the reasons why we went with a sub-DAO model is because of the speed at which we need to change, and the speed at which we need to not only make decisions, but then implement those decisions, and overall the complexity of the system. I think, like, for example, relative to Aave, I think it's fairly easy to see how high touch Synthetix is in terms of the product, and in terms of what we need to do to get to product market fit. So I think the product, and I guess the maturity of the products, is a determining factor for the actual model that we went with. And it's a pretty important input, I think. Something like Uniswap, at least from our perspective or my perspective, seems much easier to be automated, because I think the parameters are somewhat defined. So I think it's quite an important point, because depending on what you're building and depending on the complexity involved and what stage you're at, I think those are really important inputs into, like, whether you go fully open community, or sub-DAO, or kind of minimize governance in general. So going back to our progress, so PDAO, the expansion of the members of the PDAO, the really, I guess, step change for us was introducing the Spartan Council. So having a council that, again, are voted in by token holders, and having them responsible for proposals that are made or presented by anybody. So we have an open proposal system. We don't have a minimum token number or any kind of minimum level of metrics in any way where we actually filter any proposal submissions. So anyone can propose something in the community, and then it's up to the Spartan Council to evaluate that proposal. And basically vote on those proposals. So they spend time thinking about the proposal individually. They get together as a council. The proposer of the SIP itself actually has a session where they present their proposal to the council. They also have an opportunity to discuss it with the person who's proposed, and also amongst themselves. And then they essentially justify a decision, communicate a decision, as well as obviously vote on that decision. So that's kind of the mechanism around how proposals are submitted and then proposals are voted on, which is fairly unique. I think the way that it all comes together is fairly unique. Some of the things that some of the objectives that we had in mind when we were sort of thinking through the best structure for the protocol were, how do we encourage as much participation as possible? We think that leads to, better decision making, sort of a better opportunity to capture, high value people who kind of can kind of come in and contribute in various ways, and create sort of an element of sort of network effects. The other important thing for us was, how do we create an environment that is fair? Now, fair is a very loose term. It's a very broad term, but we tried our best to kind of try to think about what that means. And also the other element was, what does a participant mean, right? There are different ways that people can contribute and engage with the protocol. Some people will engage economically, so they'll have some sort of economic interest, i.e. holding a lot of tokens, i.e. being a large liquidity provider, something along those lines where they have a direct economic interest, and obviously those are very important stakeholders. Others are socially engaged, so others are participating less economically, but are very, very active, are very involved in spreading ideas, talking about ideas, potentially even creating a sense of community. And then you've got other people that are contributing IP of some sort. So they're, either very specialized in a certain area and contribute, but again, maybe they're not very large token holders, and maybe they're not super active, but that they contribute in ways that are quite sporadic. And so that was kind of the way that we thought around participation and fairness. And again, things like quadratic voting, sort of some type of representative democracy, we thought was a good combination of some of those. And the last aspect was, how do we create a backstop or multiple backstops so that the protocol can't be sort of attacked from a governance perspective, or that malicious behavior is minimized. And so that was something that is obviously important as well. And it's a hard balance. It's a super difficult balance to have. And no doubt, the things that we've done aren't perfect, and I'm sure there'll be challenges down the road that potentially we could have avoided with, certain trade-offs that maybe we have made that we shouldn't have. And I'm sure there's other very good things that are happening that are kind of emerging out of this structure as well. So I might just pause there in case you want to go in a certain direction, but that's, I think, a fairly good overview of where we are and how we got here.
Maybe while people are thinking, Jordan, I'm really curious about this, the representative democracy model, right? Because it almost sounds like the opposite of what Stani was just saying. He says that governance is a cost. And here we're kind of like talking about people as assets of the community, and like contributing their brain power and social and so on, and kind of like rewarding them in a way with these positions. So this, of course, the trade-off, we can imagine it could be going down like what democracy has, right? Some sort of populism, or people need to kind of like be educated enough to elect the right people. How do you know these people are qualified and so on? So how do you approach this kind of trade-off, and how is it working out so far?
Yeah, so I guess some things that are very obvious to us that might not be obvious to those on the outside is, or are, it's much more difficult to make decisions when you start to involve 5 times more people, 10 times more people through these various DAOs. And so the propagation of information, the ability to be on the same page about certain ideas, proposals becomes a little bit more difficult. So one thing that has happened is I feel like we have slowed down somewhat, because we are just by definition going through more layers and levels of kind of governance and decision making, and people need to be kept up to speed. The flip side of that is, you do have a wider set of contributors, and they have a vested interest in a way that they wouldn't if they were just proposing, on 50% of each of these votes. We've essentially expanded the team, even though we don't use that term anymore, by incentivizing people to want to be on the council, for example, or on the GDAO. We incentivize them through compensation. We believe that these people are contributing their time, their resources, their energy, and they should be compensated. And what we've done is that we've added, you could argue we've added like 20 people to, again, we don't like to use the term team, but the old definition of team. We've added a number of people that are really spending a lot of time and energy on thinking about what we're doing, on measuring things, on analyzing things, etc. So it does create surface area for people to engage, and I think it's different surface area to just saying, hey, you've got some tokens and we want you to vote every week or every fortnight on certain proposals that we present to you. And so it's been amazing. But also, like I said, it comes with its own challenges.
Certainly. And of course, we need kind of everyone to experiment with different approaches. And it's certainly working so far. So these different archetypes could emerge as like multiple workable strategies, right? If I may just call on Arthur, because I know you've been a long time kind of involved in the community, right? Would you like to kind of ask a question or comment here?
No, I think this Synthetix is probably one of the most successful in decentralizing the governance power among all the top DeFi protocol. It's not very often where you see the core, the founder himself have no decision-making power in the protocol anymore, either in an implicit or explicit manner. And I think that we also have witnessed a few time that Kane's decision are actually it's not aligned with the community, and he was actually vetoed against in that kind of decision. I mean, so I think that kind of proves the how decentralized it is, and I think that there's a reason it's called DeFi, right? So I think that there is a lot of project chasing short-term gains in a way that by moving faster. I think that, definitely every project need to make their own decision, but decentralizing a protocol has to be on the roadmap and has to be paid a sufficient attention to make sure that it's not something that you just forever kicking the can down the road. So yeah, I think that's something fairly important, and I think Synthetix is definitely leading in that regards. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, it was actually very scary to do some of these things, and credit to Kane. He has always had this vision of getting to this place, and we're not at a final destination, but we're obviously along the way. I was much more worried about some of these moves and some of these ways of decentralizing, because it's scary, right? Like one day you have some control and the next day you have less control, right? And generally as humans, we believe being in control is a good thing, because we're all benevolent and we all make good decisions and all the rest of it. So it's been emotional, like it's an emotional thing. It's not just logical, right? It's not just this is what we need to do, but it takes a level of letting go to even be able to do those things. And I think that that credit needs to go to Kane for really pushing things. Even when we were super busy and we had no bandwidth, he always carved out time to think about this and start preparing and creating the structures to even be here, right? Because this has been like a easy and 18-month process for us, right? And it's not like we had a lot of bandwidth to set aside and do it. We had to do it alongside building shit and moving fast and the craziness of DeFi. So yeah, it is important, as Arthur said, that you don't kick it down, you don't kick the can down the road too long, because it can also become a competitive advantage.